Hi, Manny Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS Legal Hotline Lawyer, and I receive an unending supply of questions where listing brokers ask me whether or not the buyer broker waived the buyer's inspection contingency by providing a copy of fill in the blank. It might be a copy of the inspection report without seller's consent. It might be a copy of a page from the buyer's inspection report. It might be not the home inspector's report, but the roof inspector's report. There are any number of circumstances where buyer brokers provide more information than they should to a listing broker, therefore to the seller, running the risk of violating the provision of the Form 35 that says that the buyer shall not deliver the inspection report or any portion of the inspection report to seller without seller's consent. The one exception being that when buyer intends to trigger the additional inspection time, buyer must deliver to the seller the inspector's recommendation. That's it. The recommendation for additional inspections. Not pictures of the subject matter of the recommendation, not an analysis of what the inspector did to reach the conclusion that buyer should talk to an additional inspector, not conclusions that the inspector reached following the analysis that inspector did. None of that should be included. The recommendation only. Buyer should seek the advice of a siding expert. Buyer should talk to an electrician. The inspector's recommendation is typically no more than 4 or 5 words. And sometimes those 4 or 5 words are embedded on a page with pictures and conclusions and descriptions of work that are done. And if that's the case, you gotta black all that stuff out. Redact it. So that all that shows is the 4 or 5 words that say, recommend siding specialist be contacted. Whatever the words are, however the inspector said it, that's all that you provide. Now, what I'm not saying is that when buyer is asking for seller to make repairs, buyer shouldn't attach a copy of an invoice from a bid from a contractor describing the work that needs to be done to solve the problem that buyer is trying to solve. Because buyer brokers, you should be doing that. A contractor's bid for work to be done to correct the problem that buyer is asking to have solved prior to closing, that is not providing seller with a copy of buyer's inspection report. A contractor's bid is not an inspection report. So buyer brokers, the best way to draft the 35R continues to be through the attachment of a contractor's bid and language on the Form 35R that says seller shall hire the identified contractor to perform all of the work identified on the attached bid. That's the most competent way to draft the Form 35R work order request, and it does not violate the prohibition on buyer delivering a copy of buyer's inspector's report to seller. But any other delivery from buyer's inspector to seller without seller's consent, with the exception of the 4 or 5 words that recommend an additional inspection, when buyer is taking advantage of the additional inspections option, any other provision of any portion of inspector's report to seller is likely to cause a waiver of buyer's inspection contingency. Buyer brokers don't do it unless you already have seller's consent to receive. And the only way you get seller's consent is by seller checking one of those boxes on the face of Form 35, or by seller providing you with a Form 35C, the appropriate box marked, and seller's initials. You don't have seller's consent based on listing brokers say, hey, go ahead, send it over. That's not seller's consent. Get seller's consent on the face of Form 35 or Form 35C, or do not send any portion of buyer's inspection report, with the exception of the 4 or 5 words necessary to trigger additional inspections. If you have questions on this topic or any other, please visit the Washington REALTORS website, warealtor.org, and send me a question through the Legal Hotline. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.